What is going on, everybody? So, with the Nintendo Switch 2 on the horizon, a lot of people are talking about the Nintendo Switch 2's specs and if it can match up to something like a PC handheld. Well, obviously, PC handhelds evolve every 2 months or so, so there is no possible way that the Switch 2 can always be up to date. The only thing we need to worry about is if the hardware is going to be good enough for Nintendo and third-party companies to optimize their games, but there is a feature that I really wanted and that annoyed me to no end on the original Switch, and that is hot swapping between micro SD cards. Now, any hardware that is compatible with SteamOS can hot swap. And if you don't know, hot swapping is to insert and remove your SD card at any point with the data inside appearing and disappearing whenever you remove or insert the SD card again. For example, if you had a 2 TB SD card like I do with 80 games inside of your Steam Deck or any hardware running SteamOS, and without running a game or anything like that, you remove the SD card from that device, and all of a sudden, all of those games magically disappear from your library because they're no longer available in the system's local storage. And then you could just simply insert the SD card again, and voila, all of your games appear and are ready to go as if you never removed the micro SD card to begin with. And with the original Nintendo Switch and the Switch Lite, if you remove an SD card while the system is on, then the Nintendo Switch will freak out and tell you to restart the system because you removed the SD card that was inside. This is a measure that Nintendo placed in order to prevent hacking or any kind of funny business to their hardware. Which means since Nintendo is so strict about the Nintendo Switch 2 as well, most likely we won't be seeing hot swapping with micro SD cards. So that means if you have about 5 1 TB micro SD cards trying to store some of those 60 to 80 gigabyte games that are bound to release on the Nintendo Switch 2, then unfortunately Nintendo probably won't give you the ability to hot swap between SD cards. And that's a real bummer, especially if you've been playing PC handhelds like I have with SteamOS, because what I personally do is use my 2 TB between two SteamOS compatible handhelds, which is my Legion Go and my Steam Deck. So if I wanted to play a certain game handheld, I just put that 2 TB into my Steam Deck. I don't have to restart the system at all, and I could just continue playing on my Legion Go if I wanted to play that game docked, and the save data in the cloud will transfer to that other handheld as well. So I won't have to go through the trouble of docking the system. I could actually have a system that's compatible with SteamOS that's already docked and more powerful like the Legion Go, and something a little better in handheld mode like the Steam Deck OLED, since it has that OLED screen and the trackpads. Now that is something else that the Switch 2 will never do, and that is having transferable cloud saves between systems without paying for a Nintendo Switch Online membership. First of all, it's even hard to have the same game between systems, but as you saw in my previous videos, I was able to play my games on Steam on 3 different devices simply because I wasn't connected to the internet on those systems. And besides that, another feature that Steam Deck has that Nintendo Switch 2 has confirmed not to include are analog triggers, and this is something that I personally need with my handheld devices, mainly because I love games like Burnout Paradise, Need for Speed Heat, or any other racing game like Forza Horizon. If we are going to have those games, it's going to be a big issue that we don't have analog triggers included with the Nintendo Switch 2. And I feel like it's very strange that Nintendo didn't include it with the Switch 2. It seems like they're still not going to focus on racing games because I guess they're too hardware intensive for the Switch 2. I'm not sure why Nintendo seems to continue to disclude an entire category and genre of video games on their Nintendo Switch 2. That's just bad for sales. If you have a whole games lineup like Need for Speed, the classic Burnout games, and Forza Horizon, then I'm assuming different type of gamers will gravitate to the Switch 2. So you see, there is a lot that handhelds like Steam Deck and Legion Go can do when they're using SteamOS that Nintendo Switch 2 will probably never be able to do, mainly because of all the strict security measures that Nintendo adapts to these handhelds. And I use the word adapt very lightly because it seems like Nintendo Switch 2 is going to be the strictest piece of hardware that Nintendo has ever released. And a lot of people are saying that the security measures have always been the same. Well, not really. Most of the time, if you tamper with your hardware, the company will most likely prevent you from going online with their hardware. Most companies straight up don't brick the system because they know that's bad press. But Nintendo just doesn't care. So I'm assuming that hot swapping is not going to be a thing, or maybe it will be. So far, Nintendo hasn't released any information about hot swapping micro SD cards. And since they only have 256 gigabytes available for these express micro SD cards, well, we have a problem because we're going to have to restart our system every single time we want to use a different micro SD card. And I'm assuming even 2 terabytes won't be enough at some point. So yeah, if you were looking to have every type of game on the Nintendo Switch 2 with the capability of playing those games and switching between micro SD cards and having a full reign of freedom between every type of genre, then the Nintendo Switch 2 might not be the place for you because the controllers don't exactly support racing games that well, unless you just want to go from 0 to 100 in 1 second. There are no transferable cloud saves, so if you wanted to buy multiple Nintendo Switch 2s, you're most likely going to have a lot of issues with the secondary and primary, since there are only secondary primary systems, and if you play any of those games offline, then you just won't be able to, especially with Game Share and the virtual game cards features, solidifying the fact that you won't be able to have multiple Nintendo Switch 2s. And I guess most people will justify it by saying, well, I don't need multiple Nintendo Switch 2s, and the virtual game cards are enough. Well, yes, they are enough, but I feel like they kind of complicate things a little too much, especially for a video game. I feel like Nintendo is taking this way too seriously. I get that it's their business, but giving gamers freedom is what the Nintendo Switch is all about, and I feel like they're slightly taking that away with the Switch 2, but I won't continue to harp on that. The most important feature that I wanted to see on the Switch 2 was hot swapping. So if you have a ton of express micro SD cards and you're just ready to download all of your games into it and swap between micro SD cards on the go without any kind of hassle, then maybe the Nintendo Switch 2 isn't for you, because there are handhelds everywhere that are compatible with SteamOS that have that hot swapping feature and the hardware and analog triggers to support those racing games that you're dying to play, as well as any AAA game that you can get your hands on third-party websites or Steam or GOG or any of those PC platforms that are available and compatible with SteamOS and Windows 11. But yeah, guys, what do you think about the hot swapping feature, cloud transfers, and analog triggers? That is something that the Nintendo Switch 2 is missing direly. I know that the hardware is still going to be impressive, but these exclusions are making me double think if I want a Nintendo Switch 2 or not, mainly because I love racing games and I have a ton of micro SD cards that I can switch between, and I would rather not restart my system every single time just to play another game on my 256 gigabyte $70 express micro SD card. But yeah, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Later.